Welcome to the Fall and Rise podcast. Today we are joined by Stan. Stan, can you please introduce yourself?
Yep. So I'm Stan, and I was the filmmaker behind two long expedition projects. The first being Russ Cook's world record-breaking run across Africa, and the second being Mitch Hutch's triathlon from the UK to the summit of Mount Everest.
Stan, how did you get into filming these huge projects? How did that first come about?
It's just sort of by accident, really. So I started off with videography when I was I've always wanted to do it. And then when I was like 15, 16, I started doing little odd jobs for 50 quid here and there. I got my first break quite a bit later when I was about 20 or something, with the YouTuber Gaskell. He gave me an editing job. And then that sort of was my in to a few other little bits here and there. But I still hadn't really broken into the industry. And then I did a project with a guy called GeoWizard, who's another YouTuber, where he kicks a football from one side of Britain to the other, as you do. And he hired me to film that. And Russ was on that project, just sort of for moral support, running alongside him. So that's how I met Russ. And then when I heard about this Project Africa, I applied for it. There was a kind of weird job interview process. And then I got the job. But I mean, really, really lucky to get it, honestly. Sort of fell into it by accident.
Talk us through a little bit, if you can, give us insight on how you applied and what was the process, because that was obviously a world record, the first person ever to run the length of Africa. And that's a big deal, and particularly to have a big break like that. How did that process happen?
Yeah, so it was a weird job interview, right? So he lived in Worthing at the time, so he invited all the applicants down to Worthing. We met in a pub at about 7 p.m. and he bought us all a round of Guinness and sort of started asking us really off the cuff questions like, what would you, right, listen, you're in Algeria, mate. You, can I swear on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Fucking like, police comes up to you, they're like, they've got AK-47s and shit, like, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? Like those sorts of questions, just kind of really off the cuff, Russ style questions. And then we had that stage of the interview for a while. And then he put us all in his van, drove us out into the middle of nowhere for about an hour, gave us some tents, dropped us off and said, right, I'll see you at 7 a.m, make a video. So we spent the night, camped out in some farmer's field. I went to McDonald's at about 3 a.m. to edit whatever crap that we'd filmed that night. And then at 7 a.m, he picked us up, took us to a running track. And bearing in mind that our jobs didn't involve running at all, and you knew that, he took us to a running track, said, right, run for 2 hours, don't stop. And that was the application process, basically.
It's got to be the most brutal interview ever.
I think he just watched too much SAS Who Dares Wins, to be honest.
So you did you run for 2 hours?
I did, yeah. Which
Okay.
I'm not a runner at all, but I knew that what he was going for is like, can these people just like adapt and just push through no matter what? So I wasn't going particularly fast or anything. But
Yeah.
I did.
So you managed to secure the job. After all of that, what made you even want to accept it?
A really good question again. I think a little bit of madness. I definitely ummed and ahed over it because it was a really scrappy start. Like the whole project came from absolutely nothing, right? And I'd never been tested like that before. I kind of always thought that I, had something, a bit of something in me to push through hard stuff more than most, maybe. But I'd never had a chance to test that. And at the beginning, we had no money, no real plan. Like, I mean, I'm sure you know about the van that we use, but it was like a kind of a grand 2009 Iveco daily school bus. That was our expedition vehicle. Like everything about it was really, really scrappy, and lots went wrong before we even started. Like we were meant to start from the top of Africa and go down, but Algeria denied our visas straight away, so we had to switch it up and start in South Africa. That's why we did it that way around. So there was definitely a lot of doubt, but I just felt like it could be something important and big. and sort of stuck it out. But the thing is, if it hadn't gone well, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, and it would have been a mistake. So it was definitely a risk.
Of course. So you're out there, and for those who may not know of this challenge, you want to give them a little bit more context and tell them how long you're out there and what was your day-to-day activities.
Yeah, so we were out there for 13 months in total. The actual run was just under a year. So we were in South Africa for a month, sort of prepping and waiting for our van to arrive on a boat. And then when we set off, I mean, it's tricky to like summarize the day to day because every day was really different in a lot of ways. But basically, you get up pretty early, film Russ setting off on his days running. And then any logistics that needed to be done, buying foods, sorting out internet, hotels, fixing bits of the van, whatever needed to be done. And that was the most varied bit because you just have a different problem every single day. Would be until the middle of the day, you'd meet Russ at a checkpoint, give him some food and water, film him again, send him off again. At some point throughout the day, you'd film him running as well. And at the end of the day, you'd film him again. And then after the sort of main day was over, I'd sit and edit until God knows when in the morning. So it's like, probably 18 to 20-hour days every day.
So obviously your job role is like a videographer, editor, but you ended up having to adapt and you're doing all these things. You start becoming like a mechanic and like a personal assistant and you're doing all these other jobs. What made you want to or naturally be willing to adapt to all these different situations? Because I would have thought most people would simply say, look, this is my job role and you're asking this much of me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of knew that was coming. I think we all did. That was part of why we signed up, really, because at the end of the day, obviously it was a bigger challenge for us, but we signed up for a challenge. Like that's why all of us were there. We had our specialisms were in videography and editing or whatever we were hired for, but we all knew that we'd have to multi-role because it's such a small team. It's so much like unexpected stuff, but like I kind of love that. Like not knowing what I'm going to do every day is what makes life worth living for me personally. So all the extra challenges and stuff were the bits that I enjoyed the most, for the most part.
Nice. What kind of prep were you doing in South Africa for a project that big? What kind of camera gear did you have, and how did you prep for that project?
I mean, it's very run and gun, right? Because pretty much the only thing you can really know is the fact that you don't know anything and going into a project like that. Like it's more about being prepared. We did some training with some ex-SAS lady on, what to do if you get kidnapped and like how to stay secure in a town or whatever. But like most of that's overkill, really. Ultimately, you just need to be good at improvising. In terms of kit, we were shooting on fairly cheap cameras, Panasonic GH5 for any nerds who are watching. But everything was planned to be really fluid and on the move because you never know when something's going to happen. So you want to just be able to pick up a camera and shoot. Most isn't planned ahead.
Sorry, I lost you there. Sorry.
Did my connection go?
No, it's my connection. Don't worry.
All good.
So the project lasted, you said 13 months. How often were you having like a break from filming, or did you not really? Were you filming every day?
So we filmed every day. I had a 3-week break in the middle, but other than that, it was no break. So I think it was like a 6-month stint and then a 5.5-month stint, broken up in the middle by a little holiday. So effectively, but when we were on the road, we were working every day.
Yeah. So it was obviously such a big project. How did you what was going through your head about what to film? Like, did Russ have set things he wanted filmed, or was it fully up to your discretion?
In terms of like creative control, it was definitely up to us. I think what we were trying to film changed quite a lot as the project progressed. Because again, like we were all super young and fairly inexperienced when we joined on, right? Because they're the only sort of people who are desperate enough that you can convince them to come on a job like this. And we got better as time went on, figured out what worked, what didn't. So there was a lot of change. But again, generally, it is about improvising. You're looking to find some structure and a bit of a storyline. So you're picking up on what's going on. Maybe Russ is having a hard time, and if you can pick up on that early, you can make it a central part of what you're asking him. And then you can sort of mold a bit of a story that way. But yeah, you're looking to break into his head. He's quite a tough nut to crack, Russ, as well. Like, he doesn't really want to talk about his feelings very much. So trying to get into his head and like work out what's going on each day and how it varies and ebbs and flows, how confident he's feeling, how broken he's feeling as the project goes on is sort of what you're looking to get, as well as finding stories in where you are. Because like for me, the star of the project isn't really Russ, it's where we were, because nobody ever goes to Africa in the West. Like, there's all these huge stigmas around it as a continent. And one of the biggest privileges of my life was being able to go there and sort of tell the stories of people who live there and show a general audience who would have no knowledge of Africa as a continent what it's like and what the people are like. And there's so many interesting stories there to look at.
Yeah. What was your favourite moment in that project?
Oh, that's a tricky one. The end? No, I don't know. I do have one that I don't know if I could pick a favorite moment. Because there are so many things that were so brilliant for different reasons, and I also think that certain things are horrendous in the moment and then become important when you've had space from them. But one of my favorite moments was there was a stretch of the trip where we did 1,000 kilometers in the Sahara Desert without roads. So it's like this big jump from halfway through Mauritania to the Algerian border where there are no roads, and you're just sort of following tire tracks through the desert. And me and my colleague Jamie, who was the other editor on the project, we were lagging behind the others a bit because Nelly had some mechanical problems. Nelly is the van, by the way, for those who don't know. She'd had some mechanical problems, so we were fixing the van up, and then we headed out into the desert. And when we first got out there, it is truly one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. So remote, like you can't see anything for miles except these huge rocks that sort of rise out of the desert. It's completely untouched by humans, and we both just kind of sort of sat there and went, "Where are we?" You know, amazing moment.
Wow. So obviously this trip was in some very dangerous places and very rural places, and I'm sure some of the scenarios you found yourself in were very beautiful. But what moments could you tell us about where you thought potentially regretted your decision to take on the challenge, or you found yourself in a bit of a tricky situation where you maybe weren't too sure how you were going to get out of it?
Yeah, there were definitely a good few moments like that. I think, first of all, I think I should say that like I wouldn't class most of the places that we went to as dangerous places. Like, I think that's part of the stigma that Africa has as a continent. Majority of the time, the people that we met were wonderful people. You know, we were like, the police are a different story in a lot of these places, and I think that's true for most of the world. But like the police normally presented a big issue, and they're where we had the most run-ins. But generally speaking, everybody else that we met were incredibly kind, far more hospitable than anyone you can find in Europe or America. Like, we had the best time with most of the people. A lot of the challenges comes from your environment. So, you know, you're in super remote places. There's barely any infrastructure. Like, food can be hard to come by quite often. You can break down in the middle of nowhere. So there were 2 times where it got really dire. One was when we were crossing the sea from Cameroon to Nigeria. Russ was running through the mountains, but our van couldn't do it, basically. So we had to put it on a boat. It was a terrible boat. Like, it sort of just looked like a large rowing boat that had been hammered together in like a couple of days. I don't know. And it took us about 3 days to load the van onto the back of the boat because there were all these issues, which I won't dive into now. We had to drive it up 2 wooden planks to get it onto the boat in the first place. The van nearly fell in the sea at that point. We eventually got it on. we set sail into this sea, which is the most pirated water in the world now. Took over from Somalia pretty recently. Luckily, we didn't encounter any pirates, but there was a big thunderstorm that hit, and the sea got pretty mad. And me and Jamie just sort of we just sort of had a really frank conversation about the fact that we weren't really sure if we were going to get out of that one alive. But there was nothing we could do, so we just had a nap basically, and then when we woke up, it was fine. Made it, didn't die.
Wow.
Yeah, mentally, how do you keep going after that? Because surely there was other moments where you were questioning it. How did you mentally push through those moments?
I think when you're out there living this super intense life where you're facing problems every single day, like, 10 times a day, there'll be an issue, be it like a small thing like a flat tire or, some rubbish food, or a big thing like, getting stuck out in the sea on a crap boat. It's relentless, and there actually just isn't time to sit there and really deep how things are. Like, it was so intense, and every single day you couldn't sit and mope about what had just happened because there was some other new problem to solve. So it's kind of like survival mode. I think like most of the processing from that comes after it's all said and done, and that's certainly something that I've been grappling with since the last 2 expeditions. But when you're in it, you're just in it, and actually you become incredibly resilient as a result, because at the end of the day, if you're not on the verge of being killed, it doesn't really matter. Like, there's always a way to solve that problem. You just have to figure it out.
Definitely. So obviously you say it made you more resilient, but now going back into what most would consider normal life, if it's from one extreme to the other, almost dying at sea, getting stranded in the desert, potentially all these different problems and corruption, and it's quite a hectic, dangerous life at some times. And now you're going back to normal life. Do you think that potentially that's changed you and changed your course and the way you look at life and the way you deal with life?
Definitely, in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, it's kind of twofold. It's how it's changed me and how it's changed how I view normal life, the West, the UK, Europe, America. How it's changed me is almost entirely for the better. Like, I feel like there are very few challenges now that I can't solve somehow. I'm not saying that like I'm mega able, because there's plenty of things I can't do, right? But it's like, when you're presented with so many challenges relentlessly, and you are forced into a situation where the only way out is to overcome them, it just kind of builds up this confidence in yourself that you'll figure out a way through stuff. So I think stuff that would have bothered me before these last 2 projects doesn't bother me at all in the same way. Doesn't mean I don't have low moments, because I think everyone does, and that's just human. But like, just having this sort of faith in your ability to figure something out, even if it's not the ideal outcome, you'll get through it. And I don't think there's anything on earth that won't pass. Like, either you have a problem and you solve it and it's done and you've figured it out, or you have a problem and you die and then it's done because you're dead. Like, that's it. Those are the 2 categories. So it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And then in terms of how it's changed my view of other things, what I find really frustrating is the sort of things that we complain about in the UK, like, which is partly my problem, because I've been really lucky to have an experience where I've been tested much further than most people do. But like, stuff like moaning about late buses and the weather and stuff like that, I don't know. We're so lucky with what we have in the UK. And I don't think anyone really appreciates that. I mean, even just having access to clean water and schools and food and stuff like that, people can't realize how lucky that is. If that makes sense.
Amazing. So you mentioned you did 2 projects. The first project we've talked about a lot about, but the other one is Project Limitless. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so this started about 3 months after Project Africa. It's a guy, Mitch Hutch, ex Royal Marines, who wanted to do a triathlon from the shores of Dover to the summit of Mount Everest. So that was a swim across the English Channel and then cycling from France to India, and then getting off his bike in India, and going from sea level, like by the coast, to the summit of Mount Everest on foot. So that was a run up to Nepal, a trek to the base camp of Everest, and then climbing the mountain as well.
Definitely wasn't, from what we've seen on the internet, as smooth as you just described it. Can you describe like the different parts, like the swim, the bike? Because the bike, from what I saw, had a lot of mishaps on it. Like, what kind of stuff was going on?
Yeah, I mean the swim was definitely the maddest bit for me to watch. I think Mitch would agree as well that that was the hardest phase of the whole journey. Um, he was in the water for 18 hours, swimming constantly. You're not allowed to touch the boat or any other people. If you do, you're disqualified. So it's just him in the water on his own for 18 hours. Um, he only started training in swimming about a year before. So compared to a lot of people who swim the channel, like he wasn't that experienced. So he had to rely on his mental strength a lot more than other people would, I think. And yeah, he injured his arm about halfway through, so he was sort of swimming one-handed for the last 6 hours. And the weather really picked up, so the conditions were really bad, like big 10-meter waves and stuff like that. So the fact that he made it at all was insane.
So all these people that you're surrounding yourself with are doing these crazy challenges. Obviously, that puts you in a certain situation where, you know, you're not shooting at a wedding where everything's all calm. You're going across the desert. You're going through mountains and the sea and all these amazing places. How do you think being around certain people that are pushing themselves to the limit and going beyond that rubs off on you as a person?
It's a really good question. I think it can have different effects. Like both healthy and unhealthy. Like it definitely inspires you to push yourself to the limit, because I think it's quite, even though there are some parallels, I think it's quite hard. For example, with Mitch, like I was the only person on his like on the ground team this time, so I definitely struggled with that one a lot. But when somebody's just come back from running across India for near a marathon and they're exhausted, you can't sit there and complain about how your editing is unpleasant. Do you know what I mean? So like it definitely pushes you to work as hard as you possibly can. And it's inspiring to see people pushing themselves to their absolute limit. I don't think it's amazing necessarily to always be surrounded by like people who are a bit tapped though, because like what your normal is very different to what's actually normal, and I think that's not always healthy. Like the way I'm living my life the way I was living my life on these two expeditions isn't healthy or sustainable. And it's definitely like something that I've struggled with coming back, is just switching off and like calming down and taking time to relax, which is essential to kind of live a healthy life. Um, so that's definitely a downside, is like you maybe hold yourself to a higher standard than what's possible. If that makes sense.
And I suppose the question is then, what makes you want to go back and be a part of these challenges again?
It's There's something really pure about being completely immersed in an experience which has essentially one singular goal. So for us, it was get to the tip of Africa. For Mitch, it was get to the summit of Everest. Like, it's a lot more complicated than that. There's so many challenges you have to overcome under that. But like, essentially, you're in a team or with a person working towards one goal, and that is your priority every single day. Whereas, like in normal day-to-day life, you might have 10 or 12 different things that you need to stress about on a day-to-day life. There's a purity, I think, in living a life that way that I really enjoy. And also, I'm just a bit of a nutcase. I really like being in danger and pushing through hard stuff. I just think it's really fun. It makes the best stories.
You mentioned that both expeditions were very high pressure, high stress. Surely, in a long run, that could cause burnout. How would you how did you combat that burnout, and what would you give advice to people who are suffering through some form of burnout?
I don't know if I'm the best person to give advice on this, because I sort of just work until I can't anymore, and I know that that's an unhealthy thing. And I actually, it's interesting you mentioned that, because on the last day of Project Limitless, after Mitch had summited, when I was editing the final video, I reached a point that I've never reached before in my life, and it was like I've been burnt out before, but this was like incapacitating burnout. Like I just hit a wall. I pushed myself too far, and I just like couldn't get out of bed. I had to come home early and sort of delay the release of that video by a week. And I think, yeah, that's something that I still haven't quite got out of yet since coming back, and it's been 2 months already. So I definitely think that it's interesting because these projects are so inspiring to so many people, and as they should be, because they're incredible stories of incredible humans doing incredible things. But I don't think the way of life of us is necessarily like something to aspire to, because it definitely has downsides. Like I've been through my fair share of anxiety, doubt, pain, misery, burnout, like, and it's sort of a sacrifice, I guess, in order to get what needs to be done.
So,
Yeah.
what do you do to manage all of those feelings and emotions? Obviously, you're doing these incredible things, you're coming back from it, and you have to deal with that afterwards and make sure that you're keeping yourself healthy. What do you do to keep above board?
I don't. It's the simplest answer. Like, I think especially because it's different. I think when a project has an end date, right? Because you know, if you just keep pushing to the end, then it'll stop, and then you can start looking after yourself. So like now I'm back, I do look after myself quite well. I think just I'm trying to take more time to relax, but also I shower every day. Like I try and eat well, which is when I'm on project, it's just whatever it takes to get the job done. And that's not a healthy way to live. Like me and Jamie on Project Africa, by the end of that project, we were so sleep deprived and so burnt out that I think we were both on 7 energy drinks a day by the end of that project. Yeah, right. It's not good, but it was just what was necessary for us to push through to the end. That's not something I'd ever do in real life, because there's no like end point to that. But on a expedition, there is an end point. So you just have to kind of cope with the way that you're living your life in order to get to the end, in order for it to stop, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mentally and physically, both expeditions must have taken a toll on you. Which part of like both expeditions was the hardest for you?
I think for both of them, weirdly, it was the editing, because everything that everyone else would do ended at the end of the day, and then there's time to switch off and relax. Whereas for both projects, I was, constantly working, constantly thinking about what needed to be done, and I probably slept like 4 or 5 hours a night max every single day for both of the projects. And actually, on the second one, that was made worse because I was the only person other than Mitch who was actually on the ground. There are a few other people, my wonderful co-producer Molly, who was working on it from the UK. But in terms of like actual on the ground team, it was just me. So it's quite lonely. It can be quite a lonely job. You'll be sat up when everyone else is asleep, at 4 a.m, struggling through something. And when that's sustained over a year or whatever, that can be pretty taxing, I think.
The Project Limitless, I think I'd argue you went through more dangerous countries than Project Africa.
I don't know.
Would you?
No, go on. Sorry.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, did your mental resilience from Project Africa benefit you at all on the Project Limitless?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, to be fair, that Project Limitless, it's difficult to judge a whole country's dangers, but in terms of like in-country dangers, there was a lot less. The only one I think that you could really described that way as Iraq, which actually turned out to be a really wonderful experience. Again, just filled with amazing people. But it's definitely what I learned from Project Africa. First of all, in terms of like personal safety, just like having eyes in the back of your head, constantly being aware and a little bit on edge in case something does happen, because it does occasionally. So having that and like a knowledge of how to solve a situation, calm down a conflict if there is one, all of that stuff really helps. Luckily, never had to use it on Limitless. But also, I just think taking away some of the fear really helped. Like going into Project Africa, I had all the same misconceptions about third world countries or whatever you want to call them these days, as most people do, right? So, you really overhype the danger level of certain places. Whereas now, I know that at the end of the day, everyone you're going to encounter is a human being who's basically the same as anyone else. And knowing that, it takes away some of the fear, but it also just allows you to deal with things in a more sort of sensitive, compassionate way, which at the end of the day is going to keep you safer, because instead of being scared of a local man on the side of the road with a machete, you're going to walk up to him and ask him how much sugar cane he's managed to chop down. You know what I mean? Like, so that knowledge really helps going into the next one, of just not really being too worried, but at the same time knowing how to be vigilant in case anything does go wrong.
Definitely. What is next for you?
Great question. I've told myself that I'm not going to go on another big expedition like that for a while. Like I've hit a point now with the last one where I realize how much of a toll it's taking on my mind and my body. So at least for the next sort of 6 months to a year, I definitely don't want to do another thing like that. I know that I will at some point if the opportunity arises, because I love it. And I also want to do sort of smaller projects that are maybe only a couple of months long in a similar vein, which I can't talk about it right now because it's in the works, but there might be an expedition coming up at the end of the year, which is 3 months long, which I'd be really excited to do because it's just slightly more manageable. But the big also the big problem with these jobs is that like it is your whole life. So like you come back to the UK and you don't have a life. Like you've got your friends and stuff, but like, I want to build a little bit of a life for myself now. I feel like I've served my time for the moment. I'll revisit it.
Definitely. And you also, because you've built yourself such a big name with these huge projects, you're going to have all sorts of people contacting you, I imagine, for projects.
You'd be amazed how many people want to run/walk/cycle from A to B at the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, Stan, we ask 3 questions to all of our guests. The first one is, who inspired you to do what you do?
No, that's a great question. There's a few people. Maybe the most relevant one is a naturalist called Steve Backshall. I don't know if you've heard of him. I watched him religiously when I was a kid, and he's a big part of why I wanted to get into filmmaking, and also why I sort of fell in love with adventure. So I think probably he's the one most.
I've got another question actually, leading on from that. Would you ever do a project like Deadly 60?
Yeah. If anyone's watching that make that happen, call me. Love to. Be amazing.
So our second question is, if your younger self could see you now, what would he say?
I think my younger self would be truly shocked, because I was a proper nerdy little dweeb in school. Like, sat at home playing Minecraft, introverted. Like, I didn't get bullied, but I got picked on a lot. Like, terrible in PE, hated sports. Like, very, very different to who I am now in a lot of ways. So I just think he'd be shocked, to be honest.
Wow. And the third and final question we have for you, Stan, is a message for anyone who's listening.
That no matter how bad your current situation seems, this too shall pass. And ultimately you'll get through whatever's happening. Might take some time. You might not know how you're going to do it. But if you just have faith in that and back yourself into a corner, where the only way out is to solve the problem, you'll always find a way.
That was an amazing chat. Thank you so much, Dan,
Pleasure.
for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
Cheers.
you.